Yeah, let me ask a little bit about 20%, 30% issue. I think you are being discussing very in heated way in EU that whether you should increase the number to 30 or not. And I think that number is also contingent upon the other countries' participation or effort. So could you explain what kind of actual concrete conclusion you are asking for other countries?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. I think we share, and I believe Japan shares this goal of 80% by 2050. So there are various ways of getting to that. I think actually the US has that target as well. And it's all about the shape of the curve. When do you start the action, the tough action? In the UK, we believe that the earlier you start it, in the long term, the cheaper it is for your economy. So although it does cost a significant percentage of GDP, in the longer term, you benefit from early mover advantages. So getting into markets early, and you give your companies a chance to be at the head of the movement, which we're going to see. I'm sure we're going to see it. So we believe that it's in the EU's interest to have a 30% target rather than a 20% target. But that's painful. It's not without difficulty. It's challenging. And there are countries in Europe, as you know, who have a sort of industrial base to their economy, particularly countries like Poland, where they rely on industry and in a different way to the way that say the UK does. So there are different voices in the EU, and we're discussing that internally, the possibility of a 30% target. But we believe that in the long term, it's in our economic interest as well as in the interest of the globe and the EU in terms of cutting carbon emissions, because carbon emissions are going to cost us in terms of trying to adapt to the effects of it. They're going to catch up with us in 10, 20 years' time. So the more we can do to reduce the effects through mitigation, actually, economically, it's cheaper as well. There's also an element of, there are two other elements to this. There's the energy security side of things. And we talked about that earlier in terms of really being reliant on oil and gas. And there's also the climate security element, which is about the effect of climate change as a stress multiplier in terms of making conflicts more likely, making food scarcity, water scarcity, all of these things more likely. And all of those also have an effect on, in the end, they have a cost, an economic cost, because situations will need to be rescued and resolved. And that will cost probably the developed world in the end. So I think there's lots of arguments to support the 30%.
Thank you very much. Then we talked about a little on operationalization of Cancun agreement, but in negotiation we have a kind of mantra which says nothing will be agreed until everything will be agreed. So, and I think still the biggest kind of divide between developed country and developing countries is an equity issue, and how do we allocate the burden on emission reduction or limitation. And I think still that is a very, very important issue for all countries. So how do you think we can clear, or how we can fix this issue in more peaceful way? Do you have any creative idea?
I didn't know that it was not peaceful. That's news to me. I thought it was a very peaceful conversation. I don't believe in the concept of allocation of burden. I believe in the concept of allocation of opportunity. And I believe that that some countries, like China, have already realized that addressing climate in their national economic plans certainly helps the planet, but more importantly, it helps Chinese development. I think there are some countries that have not realized that. With all due respect to my good friend Elmore Holt, I believe that the United States has not realized that they are losing the green race, that China is winning the green race, and that this is about low-carbon societies. And those countries that realize it first, that the fact is that the future is in low-carbon technologies, those countries are going to take advantage of those opportunities and are going to make themselves more competitive. So this is not about allocating burden. This is about countries realizing that that the future will. There's only one option. Sometimes you're burdened by having to choose among options. This is not one of the cases. There's only one option for all of us to move forward, and that is low carbon. That is indisputable. So when are countries going to wake up to that? It seems to me that Korea has woken up to that. It seems to me that China has woken up to that. It seems to me, as we have just heard from Richard, that the EU has realized that it is in their best interest to accelerate this transformation. And as soon as the critical mass of countries wake up to that, this is going to be actually hugely accelerated. Let me use a very simple example. The transformation that we've had in the information, in the communication industry. When I grew up, and now you'll know how old I am, when I grew up as a young girl, to make a phone call, I approached a big box that was hanging on the wall with a big black phone that was about this big and had a rotating thing that I went, and that called an operator, who was a woman, of course, who then answered and said, yes, this is the operator. Who would you like to speak to? And I said, I would like to speak to so-and-so. And then she would take a cable and put it into a little hole that connected, to the office of Mr. So-and-so. Well, here we are decades later, and now we have cell phones, not just in industrialized countries, but in all developing countries. And these cell phones have moved from what we had 20 years ago, the first cell phone, weighed more than 3 pounds. 3 pounds. Now we have cell phones that weigh a couple of ounces and that not only are used for data transmission, voice data, but for all kinds of other data. And you know how the youth can spend 26 hours a day just using their little phones because it has so much information and so many capacity. Well, that is a huge revolution in the industry of communication. A similar revolution is what we're expecting in the energy sector. The fact that developing countries have realized that it is very much in their interest to bypass all of these complicated wire-based, cable-based telephone systems and just move straight into cell phone, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to bypass the technology that has already become obsolete, which is the very high carbon fossil fuel energy generation technology. That's already obsolete. Today, it is already obsolete. So we need to bypass that and move into the renewable energy technology, and for those fossil fuel energy sources that will remain, because the International Energy Agency tells us that even when we are stabilizing concentrations, we will still have 60% of our energy fueled by fossil fuel. Well, for those, we need efficiency in the distribution lines, and we need certainly much more carbon capturing technology for the fossil fuel-based energy technology. But it's very clear where we're going. So when are we going to wake up and actually move into the future? I mean, we can stay in the past as long as we want, but it's not doing anybody any good. So the invitation here is wake up, move into the future. And if not, ask your kids, because they're already there.
Thank you very much. That's a very good wake-up call to people. But still, I'm playing a little bit devil's advocate. People in negotiation say, for example, developing countries is not doing anything at all on climate change mitigation action. But I agree that it's not true. There are taking a lot of mitigation action for their own security reason. But there are many kind of premise or assumption or hypothesis that developing countries are not doing at all. So that's why developed country like US or Japan or other developed country don't take any action without meaningful participation of developing countries, especially emerging economies. So how can we change that kind of mindset or way of negotiation? Because many people understand investment is very important, and many countries are doing a lot of investment on renewable and technology. But still, at COP, at AWG, any kind of negotiation, people just saying other countries doing nothing at all, and so why we should do anything? So how can we change this kind of mindset of negotiators?
Well, why don't you tell us? But I was going to say something totally disrespectful, so why don't you say something first?
You want to say something?
You go, and then I'll follow up.
All right, thank you. I agree entirely what Christiana is saying about this is not about whether, it's about how fast. This is something the world has to do. If you look at what's going on in the Middle East right now, it's a very good illustration of climate security. Tunisians first came onto the street in protest at high food prices, which were driven up by climatically intensified supply shocks. And this is an example of the fact that climate change is a stress multiplier. If you think about the kinds of issues that climate change throws up, things like food security, water security, energy security, those are the things that drive people onto the streets because they affect their daily lives. And I think the problem is that in a high carbon economy, which is what we have now, you can't switch those things off. So on the security, on the risk side, I think that's something we have to bear in mind. On the opportunity side, these opportunities are real. There are jobs being created every day. There are, the markets are getting bigger every day, and it really is a race. Who is going to take advantage first of these opportunities? And as developed countries, we have a responsibility to lead the way. I don't think it's correct that nothing's happening in developing countries because you look at China, you look at lots of other India, Brazil, you look at lots of other countries. There's lots going on. I think there's a question here about bottom up and top down as well. Bottom up action is happening anyway. It's happening, but it can be accelerated. It can be made to happen faster if governments are prepared to make ambitious pledges and create ambitious targets which are legally binding, so that they're promising that even when the political going gets tough, they're still going to stick to these targets. And that's the sign that businesses need. And that's the responsibilities that developed country governments have, is to create those targets. That's what they can do, I think. And show how, and policies to show how they're going to deliver those targets as well, and to support the people whose lives will be made harder because of the targets. And I think that's where governments can make a contribution.